I just feel grateful. It's a rare privilege to be asked so many questions about one's life. I think we all secretly hope for moments like these to just say, here's who I am and what I believe in. And I might not have this opportunity again. And so you've given this to me, and I'm deeply grateful for that. Thank you for doing all the research on things I've put out there. It really shows, and uh, I just enjoyed this conversation so much more than I ever would have imagined because of that.
This is the Inner Landscape Travel Agency. Let's saunter across the psyche through creativity, self-discovery, and the sacred. If you're curious, playful, and seeking, welcome. Hi, Johnny. Thank you for joining for a conversational portrait. We originally met close to a decade ago while we were both in agricultural technology, and I was a newcomer, and you were already building one of the most prominent companies in the field. From afar, I admired your gumption. Years later, recently, we re-met after I found your blog on men's work. And what astounds me about your efforts was that how quickly you've learned and embodied and facilitated such challenging material. You became an indispensable resource for many, building restoratively in a vacuum that insidiously and sometimes even viciously claims lives. Your writing is insightful, necessarily irreverent, and relatable. And those are handy signs to know that someone is increasingly comfortable with themselves and also knows how imperative the work they're doing is for others. Thank you for helping others feel safe. Welcome, Johnny Bowman.
Thank you, Mick. Super glad to be here.
Going inward requires both literal and figurative silence. In your life, where do you find the silence?
I'm not a fan of meditation for myself. There's seldom actual silence. But for me, um, anytime I'm doing one thing and my mind is doing another, tends to be those moments. Like working out can be one, taking a walk is another, taking a shower is another. Those are the moments where I uh, enjoy letting my mind wander. And then writing. Writing is the number one thing that I do that I feel like my truth is fully expressed. When I speak, maybe I get 70% of the way there on a good day. But writing and literally just staring at a computer and thinking like, what is the most honest thing I can think right now? That's when I feel like I can be as accurate in my thoughts and beliefs as I possibly can.
What thoughts like to visit your silence?
Hot takes. Those that's the currency of my mind. Anything that feels like an opinion that is honestly just for me entertainment, but is a lens into the world that feels counterintuitive yet insightful at the same time.
But not counterintuitive for its own sake. It's a counterintuition that makes sense because something about what's not counter doesn't seem to be working.
Yeah, something maybe that just feels new and entertaining.
Are those the favorite thoughts you most enjoy thinking, the counterintuitive ones?
Those are my favorite thoughts. Yeah, I mean the other ones are like I do a lot of men's work, and the number one question that is in the back of my mind anytime I do men's work is how am I feeling, and that is not something that I spend most of my time thinking, but when I deliberately go into that space, which is at least once a day, I'd say, I I really try to sink as deeply into that feeling as I possibly can.
Who are the people in your life with whom you can share silence?
My girlfriend, is the number one person I do that with. We enjoy just talking to each other, but spend a lot of time doing her own thing side by side. She's 10 feet over there on the other side of this wall. Uh, and and that's comforting, but also we don't need to be uh, engaging with each other to just feel each other, and I enjoy that a lot. I enjoy that a lot. But a lot of my friends, there's just not a need to be talking when we're together, and and so I would say most people in my life that I have a close relationship with, there's a decent amount of silence.
Aside from writing and from being in proximal silence, what are your favorite sensory experiences?
Well, that's interesting because I count myself as a fairly numb person that is trying to feel more and more. The one sense that I have a horrible sense of smell. Never was able to smell. I'm allergic to grass of all things, and so um, anytime I am able to smell something, it's delightful. Like even if it's a bad smell, it's like holy crap, I can smell this. This is amazing. So I enjoy that. Um, I ate a peach yesterday. That was like the most delicious thing I've ever experienced, and so taste really goes a long way these days for me too.
What happens when you smell something delightful? I mean, what if you just describe yourself as, well, I'm paraphrasing, kind of numb in recovery?
There's certain smells that give me a sense of safety. Like they remind me of certain places that I've been, a friend's house or back home. The smell of like a forest is one that I chase often. I went foraging this last weekend, and there's just a sense of kind of woodiness that relaxes me. So I think being in nature has its own sense of smells that have like a very relaxing effect on my nervous system. And then cooking and just being around a kitchen is is another one for me that just makes me feel at ease.
Can you talk about any parallels you might have seen between navigating a forest and foraging for goodies and doing the similar work in your own inner depths?
Ooh, hell of a metaphor that I'm going to try to mine right now. So foraging and exploring inner depths. I don't take foraging that seriously, to be honest. For me, it's like I'm one of those museum goers that enters a museum and spends 20 seconds in each room. Just like what's nice looking and then keep it moving. Foraging for me is similar, where some people really spend, you know, their sweet time looking around a tree and trying to see if there's anything there. And I'm just trying to have a brisk walk. And if I see anything, great. If I don't, whatever. As a result, I don't find much. But other people I'm with who do spend more time do. I do think that to be a good forager requires taking one's time and really understanding, like if there's a beech tree here or a maple tree there, what can I expect around here? And um, and exploring inner depths is similar, where you're pattern recognizing, saying, "This thing happened. What can I expect from myself, from my emotions, and can I take a different route or go the same route, but find a route that serves me as opposed to what might not?" For example, I went foraging for chanterelles, type of mushroom, bright orange. Never saw them before someone said, "Hey, here's what one looks like." They're all over the Northeast, but come up in specific times. And once you see one, you know what they look like. You see them everywhere, and as long as it's the right time. And so uh, I think pattern recognition for one's inner landscape, especially triggers and emotions that come as a result of that, is similar. Once you see it, when someone points that out to me, then it's like, well, I can't ignore it anymore. It's gonna be in my face every time I do this, and now I have to do something about it. So That's my metaphor there.
If you think about yourself meandering the woods, sometimes a bit quickly, sometimes with friends who are deliberately attuned to the potential goodies, there there's a certain expression of curiosity about the space, of wanting to find something and looking for it in different areas. Can you share a story about a time where someone of any species was curious about you?
I mean, so my girlfriend comes to mind most, is the person who's knows me the best and has spent the most time with me, and certainly held a mirror up to my bullshit the most. Um, and honestly, I think that's the origins of falling in love for me. Is we had a rocky early start. We became enemies for about 9 months. Just wouldn't talk to each other. Um, and and after 9 months, she reached out and was curious, and um, just wanted to know how I was doing. We met up, and having someone who uh, understands my bullshit, understands all the things that I can do that can piss her off, while at the same time staying curious and being like, "Oh, I understand that and want to know more," and uh, yeah, have a lot of sympathy, respect, and well wishes for you. That to me like melted my heart, and so we got back together uh, after we met up, and we've been together now for 4 years. Um, and honestly, haven't had a fight ever since. I think staying curious, what melted my heart was holding two things at once. It was like this part of you, and I want to know more. And uh, and I think that's a rare thing to have, a rare relationship, a rare set of feelings to have about somebody. But I do think it's so key to love and just really appreciating anybody in life, seeing both sides and wanting more.
The this ability to see multiple sides, to perceive the world through the areas that we've, whether we were drawn to it, whether we deliberately chose it, or through happenstance, we had to cultivate those apertures in us. That gives us a distinct perspective on reality. And I'm sure this is a question we're going to revisit from many sides, even if only implicitly. What I'm fascinated with is how we can share space together, look at the same thing, but we'll experience it completely differently because of our respective apertures, the things that we've cultivated, or again, through happenstance. So I know I'll never quite understand what it's like to be you, but I want to get close to that. And I'm curious, through your unique set of life experiences, the knowledge, the skills, what do you see today that few others can? Where do you see more depth and nuance and intricacy because of what you've chosen to, or you felt impelled to focus on, and therefore you are more attuned to?
For me, I talk to a lot of dudes about their feelings. I do a lot of men's work. I sit in circle with dudes. I do retreats where we go into the most traumatizing experiences that they've experienced. And I feel now I have a decent grasp on whether someone, just what dudes are feeling, and the top emotions men are feeling and how similar they are, no matter what background they're coming from. I do a lot of work with formerly incarcerated men, do a lot of work with dudes who are just white collar millennial guys who, maybe had an aloof father, but, came up in a stable household. And it's the same emotions. It's the same root issues. Everyone's got mommy and daddy issues no matter what. A lot of dudes feel shame. A lot of dudes feel anger. But how we process them and express them does come out differently. I do feel like a lot of the more structural issues that America, the world faces, are just more structural embodiments of those same emotions as well. And so those are the things I like to be sensitive to.
When you think about this this path that you're on now and the coalescing of it, I'm curious to go back further, um, of when you first felt the coalescing sense of self and intuited the path that you were on.
I think that coalescing is still happening in a big way. But in terms of turning points for me, to date, let's see. I think a big one for me was the writer's strike of 2007. Both my parents were TV writers. My dad ended up being one of the negotiators, kind of by accident, on the writer's side. And that was what attuned me to power dynamics. I was not someone who was very political before then, but then afterwards, uh, realizing that if these white collar folks who do decently well are so pissed off and feeling so screwed over that they're going to strike for 3 months, something deeply wrong is happening here. And how is the rest of the country doing? So that was one turning point. Uh, Another turning point was just really coming to terms with how numb I had become. I remember being 31, 32, and I was working at a startup that was taking up all of my time. And all I could think of was, I'm broke. And anytime someone mentions, is in a conversation, and is either sad or angry or fearful, I want to change the conversation subject immediately to make them feel neutral, make them feel happy, whatever. But I just couldn't deal with other people's stuff. And other friends of mine would ask questions and they would go deeper. They would follow the emotion as opposed to changing the subject or running away from it. And I felt like an emotional child. And so it wasn't a big event that happened, but it was literally just me at a kitchen table watching a conversation unfold and being like, I emotionally am being lapped by my peers and I'm broke. I'm a loser. And so uh, that spurred my decision to seek out men's work. A friend at a party told me about men's work and I signed up for a retreat. And that was a turning point for me because it wasn't just receiving it. It was like, okay, here are a set of tools. Here's a community. Go and help other people as well. Receive and then give. And that was the most beautiful example of community I'd ever seen. So that was a huge turning point for me. And then finally, another turning point would be my father passing away. And I, at that point, before then, I should say, I wasn't really thinking about making mental health or men's work a big part of my life. But that spurred me to think about, I've only got one life. I really have to feel deeply into what this next stage of my life is going to look like. And this is the problem I think about when I'm not working. Why not make it the problem I think about when I am working? Um, and so I took a year off to just think about that and see like, okay, what are my issues so that I can make my issues part of the things that I really try to help other people with.
Looking back, if you think about the things that people can see about you, but maybe at some point were still invisible to you. So they're accessible, but maybe you're not aware. What's something that you wish someone told you about yourself? Something that was visible to them, but hidden to you at that stage.
I think shame is something I grew up with a lot of. And I didn't think it was gripping me that much. I think other people could see it and it saw how limiting it was. And I wish I knew earlier on that it's a fairly useless emotion. I mean, maybe 5% of the shame that I experience, that I think a lot of people experience, is useful because it can point us in the right direction. It can say, stop doing that. But it's not a useful emotion for action. It's not a useful emotion for actual behavior change. And so feeling shameful about, oh, I should be this way, I should be kinder, be smarter, be harder working, it's not going to result in anything productive if you're in shame. It has to evolve into a different emotion like hope or even anger or fear that does result in action for anything to change.
I want to delve into shame a little bit later. On the other side of shame is this. I like the analogy that you've written about of the inner restaurant owner hyphen manager energy. Can you talk about finding that inner energy?
So the restaurant energy, or the restaurant owner energy, is stolen straight from Sam Parr, the host of another podcast, My First Million. And it's this notion that we've all been in a restaurant, and if you've seen a restaurant owner kind of making the rounds at a table, there's just a very gracious energy of like, so happy you're here. Let me give you some water. What do you need? And and that is a choice. That restaurant owner can be feeling all types of shit, but they're going to show up in that way because it just puts people at ease and makes them want to be there. That's a beautiful energy, I think, to have in life, to choose in life. And as opposed to retreating into myself and thinking, oh, like, how should I act? Does this person know that, you know, that they're acting this way? Or I shouldn't say this thing. Just cutting out all the bullshit and cerebralness of like, how should I act? Or should I say something funny? And just being gracious, just asking people what they're looking for or need, or being physical and giving a big hug or a pat on the back, or just being grateful that someone is in the presence, you're my own presence. It's so clear when you see it, and it's not hard to do. It's just something that is appreciated by everybody. And I think the restaurant owner is just kind of a common example of this. Uh, but it's hospitality, and hospitality works for a reason. I think we can not let restaurant owners own that energy. It should be something that pervades culture.
One of the things that stands out to me about that analogy standing out to you and the distinction between an owner and the discussion you've had with your girlfriend about the manager who owns what and who, the relationship there. Your education, your both an undergrad and business school, can be viewed as a contrast to the work that you pursued for nearly a decade and the work that you do now, and even the analogies that resonate with you. I'm curious about how these different parts of you work together. The schooling and the community you're around there, the type of work that you were doing that was simultaneously cerebral and physical within agriculture, and this appeal of the relationship, blue collar community element of hospitality.
Mm. Let me just talk about how those things work chronologically, and maybe they make sense and maybe they don't when they're put together. Coming out of Harvard for college and business school, there's an ethos that is lobbed onto anyone who goes there of you're going to change the world, focus on impact. You are responsible for making the world a better place. And that is an intoxicating energy that had a big impact on me. I came out thinking like I'm going to be the Mark Zuckerberg of something. I gotta have impact. Now, there's a another element of that, which is that notion tends to be thought of in very economic terms. So jobs are a very millennial focus, or a very like, you know, econ 101 focus of like, how do you make the world a better place? And that's exactly what I came out of school with, which is how do I create better jobs? A lot of jobs are shitty. How do I make them less shitty? And that's what got me into manufacturing and food processing. I was like, that is a hard job. We can make it a lot better. Vertical farming is one way to do that, basically turning a seasonal picking vegetables, break your back kind of job into a 9 to 5 that is better paid, is far more productive, and just has less exploitation involved. You're working in a factory and not a field. That's a big life upgrade. That was my focus for 8 years. That notion of I can help the world by creating better jobs gave way to what is actually my problem with with my world. And it wasn't I need a better job. Um, I wasn't a farm worker. It became like I'm dealing with shame and anger and a lot of repressed emotions. I need to help myself before I help anybody else. There's this notion in men's work that your greatest gift is your greatest wound, or uh, the thing that you want most is the thing you are best able to give. And that notion changed my life, because it was then that I realized that I am not yearning for uh, a factory job. I'm probably not the best person able to give that. What I am yearning for is a sense of safety, a sense of community, and to not feel shameful or angry. I want to feel this good and have a good time. That is a very difficult place to achieve in 2024 for a lot of men. And so by exploring that for myself, I became more and more interested in how do we, as men, as a community, create that for each other. And that's what then brought me into men's work. So I'm still ambitious in that sense of like, how do I change the world? But it's less focused on how do I, improve GDP by X%, and more just like, how do I become happy? And maybe the way I do that is in a communal way so that we can feed off each other and do this together.
Between these career choices and the different communities you've been involved with, how have you navigated a sense of belonging and being yourself? Because at times the things that you were drawn to were in conflict with the environment that you were working in, or the things that were necessary to get done at that point.
I think the most potent example of that is the men's group that I am on the board of and have been a member of since it started, called All Kings. All Kings is about 50% formerly incarcerated. Formerly incarcerated men are whom we serve. I am not formerly incarcerated. I went to Harvard twice. I am as far away from that experience as I think most people can get. And there's this notion that people like me cannot be themselves in a community of formerly incarcerated dudes. I mean, mostly black and brown dudes who have seen the worst kind of violence growing up, seen the worst kind of violence in jail, have perpetuated a lot of that violence themselves. And there's a culture divide. There's a race divide. There's a class divide. There's a just how you act and expect from others divide. And I think a lot of that comes down to white guilt for a lot of folks. And certainly beginning, I was very like self-aware and protective of how I was showing up. But it pretty quickly dissolves once I was actually in the community and actually just talking about my feelings and realizing that the only way I was ever going to connect with other dudes was by showing up and being myself. And that anything I was going to do to appease anybody else, say anything to make other people like me, was going to be dismissed and seen through and make other dudes not feel safe because they know I'm bullshit. They know I'm just putting on a thing. Just showing up as exactly who I am. It can be corny. It can be, talking about money in ways that would be uncomfortable, I think, for a lot of dudes talking to formerly incarcerated men. I gotta say those things if those are the issues I'm dealing with. And there's a fear that, oh, that's going to put distance between me and them, and it just doesn't. It doesn't. Like, they know who I am, I know who they are. We're going to have different issues, and a lot of those issues, even though, like, I could say, I could complain about a boss at a job, and the boss issue is going to be at some level exactly the same issue that a lot of dudes are dealing with. And so you just, it took me a little bit, but if you're in circle for a couple months with dudes, that self-awareness starts to dissolve, or that fear of how I'm being seen, I think, starts to dissolve pretty quick, because the goal is feeling and connection, and all of that shit gets in the way.
You spoke earlier about how the realities of running your own business in your 20s and your 30s led you to compare yourself to your peers. You saw a link between their comfort with themselves and to go deeper into emotional topics, in part their ability to afford therapy. And you made a very big change for yourself. The things that you were avoiding, yeah, the thing that you felt lacking before is now the space you dedicated yourself to. And you turned your biggest wound into the thing that you can so gracefully give, even teaching courses and guiding others in this. Can you talk about what it means for you to have taken that core thing that was so inaccessible to you once to now being the core thing that you're able to embody and provide others with?
Yeah, I mean, first, thank you. I try to embody it, but it's a lifelong journey of trying to embody safety, emotion, whatever it is that we do in men's work. Back to this notion of, I am best able to give what I want for myself the most. I felt totally unable to express anger, totally unable to express sadness, to grieve, to cry, totally unable to even just look a dude in the eye and express my gratitude towards him. And when I started seeing other people do that, not once, but like 30 times, only then was I able to do that, because I had seen it, and like my nervous system just kind of understood what that was about. It wasn't a cerebral, like, oh, I got to learn how to cry, I'm going to like read a guidebook on how to cry. Just watch a dude cry for 30 times. And it can't be on screen. It needs to feel real, and just like touch his body when he's doing it, and just feel how his back feels, feel how his shoulders feel, and then just feel how my body, or your own body, changes as a result. And all of a sudden, those emotions become accessible. And so then it just became a natural part of me relating to guys. Like, I get pissed off now, and as opposed to bottling it up, like, I express it. And when it's expressed in a clean way, it's appreciated. It's clear. It's understood. There's a boundary set, and we keep it moving. And then once I saw that was appreciated, and it was serving me, it was serving other people, then it kind of became the way I get energy. It's like, oh my God, okay, this is working. I don't need to. Um, it was the first time I got positive feedback on something that wasn't just being smart or doing work. I was getting positive feedback on how I was showing up. And that's a different kind of feeling good. It doesn't feel like an achievement. It feels like I'm appreciated for who I am. That is a priceless feeling. And so yeah, I'm going to do that as much as I can. And I'm going to try to make that a more focal point in my life. And not teach other guys how to do it, but just keep on doing it for me and doing it in the presence of other dudes. And we're going to do it together.
You said that this was the first time where you felt accepted for being rather than doing something. Is that the first time that someone saw something in you that you didn't see enough of, or maybe at all in yourself?
I've always gotten appreciation from family, from friends. So I don't feel like I was unseen, that people didn't get me, and now all of a sudden, like, I have a space where people get me. What I realized I needed was just a space to feel like, okay, Johnny, the point of this space is to be yourself. That was new. It wasn't even the people's reactions to how I acted in that space. It was just saying, once you step into this church basement, say the most honest thing you possibly can. Express yourself as honestly as you can. And that in and of itself was new. It didn't matter how other dudes reacted. It could have been a negative reaction. Um, but even knowing the negative reaction was going to be real and that we both wanted to be there, that was the most energizing feeling that I could get. And then, yeah, it ends up having a very positive effect on how I show up. And then other people start giving me feedback of like, hey, Johnny, you're, a deeper dude now. You're able to have a better conversation. I appreciated like what you said. That made me feel good. All of that stuff is icing on the cake.
And the core was that you can show up and express, and you don't care what the reaction is as long as it's real.
Yeah.
What's fascinating about this is I generally hear about, or things I've read about, things I've experienced tend to be about there wasn't an environment to express oneself, and therefore there was this, and that was it overlapped with therefore a lack of appreciation for these certain sides. And I think what I'm hearing for you is you had this appreciation, like, hey, you're a great person, like being around you, you're a-okay, but you didn't feel that the space that you were given, you took up enough. I'm almost seeing like the image I have is of this, this big circle of Johnny, and this is the big circle of appreciation, but the amount of expression within that of you is smaller than the circle. And what you described as being able to authentically express yourself, regardless of what the reaction was, filled up that circle, maybe even expanded it.
The way I saw appreciation was achievement and uh, jumping over hoops and doing hard things. And that is a pretty big circle for a lot of guys. It's perceived as one. And then, but it's a rat race. It's a rat race to jump through that circle and then find a bigger, higher, more difficult circle to jump through. And then having a conversation where both me and the other person come away feeling better, and I know the other person is appreciative of it, and we're both feeling some, like, either it could be sad, it could be a sad conversation, but the fact that we're both feeling sad together, it's appreciated, and it's something that they are grateful for. That opened up a whole portal of appreciation that dwarfs any accomplishment. Like, it's those moments are so much more frequent than any accomplishment. They happen every single day. And so if I can focus on that, then that feels so much bigger than an accomplishment and so much more accessible. So yeah, I'm going to feel more appreciated as a result.
This might come back to the belonging and being yourself question. What you just described as, there are these, you had this appreciation because you've gone through many of the steps and requisite indicators of social capital, social prowess, the right schools, right work, the ability to create these things, very challenging tasks and overcoming those. And yet because that is likened to a rat race, there's a core portion that is not met for you. And so, though you belonged there, the thing that you need to do was something that was in a completely different realm.
Yeah.
I'm trying to understand how these
I,
pieces fit.
okay, yeah. So the way they fit in my mind is I was trained to focus on achievement and impact in very kind of economic, get material success kinds of ways. It doesn't even mean necessarily make money, but like could be politics, could be a leadership of a nonprofit, just be an important person that other people look up to. Focusing on that from 18 onwards requires a certain suppression of personal needs and personal feelings. It like I focused on achievement at the expense of feelings and connection, and everything just became a means to an end. And so I, yeah, became a emotionally shallow dude, and other people could feel it, and that became unsustainable. And it became unsustainable because I was not successful. I was like, if I had gotten some big payday, if my startup had been wildly successful, I would still be doing that. I'd be like, yes, that worked out. I'll do it again. And I wouldn't have had to face anything emotionally. I would have had to face, more of the same type of problems, more of the same type of economic opportunities to get richer or to be seen more as a leader. Um, but instead, it didn't work out. And so, what am I left with? I'm left with, who the hell am I? And I think this whole focus on mental health right now, it's coming a lot from millennials where their dreams did not pan out. And I felt the same way. My dream did not pan out. So who am I? And I was going to have this dream life that came after getting a bunch of money. That's not going to happen. So what do I actually get clear on my dream life now? Because plan A is gone.
My dream didn't pan out. Was it really my dream?
Exactly.
You said something fascinating just now of, had it been successful, you wouldn't have confronted any of these things. It's hard for me to process that because of everything I'm seeing you do. And granted, like, my familiarity with it is so minimal compared to your lived experience of it. But you think that the money would have insulated you from this core side?
100%. Now, eventually, it catches up to folks on their deathbed at the very latest. But up until then, I would have been focused on whatever version of success I thought success was. And if I like, the more successful I am and the more money I'm making, like the more positive reinforcement I have, like, okay, keep doing this thing. It's only when I get smacked in the face and said, you lose, your startup went bankrupt, which it did. Uh, that's when it forces a reckoning.
Can you talk more about that reckoning? I'm curious about this because you were on the finance and operations side. You were the business school person. And so the training that you went through, the thing that you espoused or you were taught to espouse through school, led to a spot where it wasn't what you were told to expect, or what you hoped to expect.
Mm-hmm.
Was there an identity crisis there too, around like, I'm this type of student, this type of graduate, but these outcomes, like these circumstances turned out this way?
Yeah, it's a humbling one. It was an experience of, I've got all this training, I've got the credentials, I've got the network. It didn't work out, and therefore, am I is what's my identity? What was all that for? Am I on the right track? And um, and the answer felt to me like no. I I didn't feel like a fraud. I feel like I gave it my all, and I worked really hard, and I did everything I could do. But knowing that wasn't good enough made me realize like something about my compass is off here. It's it's something's got to change because I can't do that again. That was so painful and so humbling that we need a course correction. And so it was an identity crisis.
Is that a gift that came early to you compared to peers? Because you mentioned like, if money could be the thing that insulates you from this experience, and it might catch up to you on your deathbed, would peers and yeah, would your peers not have faced this until much later, until things were more dire? That almost you were the lucky one.
I mean, yeah, I think that's happening to a lot of folks. Folks who are successful don't need to reckon with their emotions. Now, would they trade their life for mine? I don't think so. Like, we all have our biases and our different wants, and having a lot of money is great. Like, I want a lot of money. Everyone should have it. It just makes a lot of things easier. And I do not begrudge anybody who focuses on that. I honestly think that focusing on it early in one's career is a great way to be able to spend more time focusing on other stuff that is more aligned with one's mission or preferences or lifestyle later on in life. It just so happens that I was forced to reckon with it at the age of 34 as opposed to 44 or 74. And so that's when I focused on it.
What stands out to me about this is also that you, at least theoretically, somewhere you were aware of, you have the network. Even if this didn't work as it did, you realized, as you described, that your inner compass was off. Something didn't materialize for you. And that rather than going into the network that you knew, you created a new one. You built something completely different. And whether it's a complementary side, whether it's a course correction, or something to integrate, you've added a fundamentally new, or I don't know if it's fundamentally new side. You've addressed an underdeveloped side. How has that shifted your orientation towards your peers?
In terms of my relationship with my peers, just thinking about my friends, I spent a lot of time with them always had a strong group of friends. But I would say even they um, could sense a filter on me, could sense a shallowness of conversation that that exists to a lesser extent today. Like I shoot the shit. I do small chat for fun. I'm not one of those people who's like I don't do small talk. I think it's a lot of fun. I like joking around. But now I have the ability to have deeper conversations, and so I know them better, and they know me better. I know their fears, and um, and more of their struggles. And I create a space for all of us to talk. Like every other week, a group of anywhere between 5 and 8 of us friends have an hour and a half of just saying, "Here's where I'm at right now," and we do it online once a month. We do it in person, and it's just a space I know now where they are, especially as like people start having kids and start moving places. That kind of knowledge becomes rare. It's not voluntarily offered because we're all just dealing with our own stuff, and there's not really a space that's dedicated to that unless someone makes it a space dedicated to that. So having a group that is specific for checking in and saying, here's what I'm up to, here's what I'm struggling with, that's been a big change. And then in terms of like yeah, how am I orientated to uh, peers more broadly? I find if I were to meet a stranger on the street 10 years ago, I would have probably tried to talk to them about economics or politics or entrepreneurship. Those are just like my intellectual interests. Now I try to talk to them about their emotional state, or whatever's coming up for them and whatever's coming up for me. And that's the lens that I feel like is a more productive lens for connection. I love talking about I love having intellectual debates about entrepreneurship or politics or economics. But to me, they're secondary now.
I'm curious about the changing role you've had when it comes to groups. And I'm curious about this from a couple angles because I think you described, you follow the path that was you're supposed to do, college, business school, and then you're with a single company for the majority of your adult career. So during that time period, you described your role as being a little bit more lighthearted, focus on the work, and more playful conversations. And now, in many ways, you're a facilitator, and you bring an organizer and a creator of space for people to address challenges, or at the very least, show up. So can you talk about that of how your the role that you default to in a group has shifted?
It hasn't shifted completely. Like I still got a type A personality that creates the calendar invite and just wants to get stuff done. That was drilled into me running a startup and has not left. What I've been forced to focus on, though, on facilitation work is not trying to fix stuff and just ask questions. So, you know, if I was in a meeting uh, 5 years ago, someone brings up an issue, my first instinct would be to A, shout out the answer, or how am I going to fix this, or who needs to fix this for you, um, so that we can move on to the next issue and tackle that one. And now I see issues as not as like whack-a-mole things that need to be solved, but there's always something else underneath. And that becomes the the fun part. It's not the discussion to be avoided because it feels icky or it feels it's emotional. Like that's what we're here for now. So let's talk about what you're avoiding or what I'm avoiding and what's behind that. Is there a charge? Is there a memory? Is there some kind of emotion that I don't want to deal with? So therefore, we have this issue. Is there a limiting belief? And often in the corporate world, that's especially in startups, that's the number one issue. Is like, oh, we can't move that fast. We can't sell that much. We can't build this thing by this time. One way to deal with that is having like a hard charging uh, approach and saying like, yes, we can. Yes, and if you don't, you're fired. Uh, and that's one way to deal with it. But it's not the most sustainable way to deal with it. I think getting people to believe and just saying like, okay, let's see if we can. Let's give it our all, and hopefully one of the more optimistic person is right. It's a more fun way to deal with that problem while recognizing like, yeah, we've all got shit that we're avoiding because we don't want to feel anger, we don't want to feel sadness, we don't want to feel whatever mom and dad issue that we grew up with. And so being aware of that, I feel like is the spice of conversation for me right now.
You mentioned, corporate world. This is the type of thinking to do, solving the problem, and that is the antithesis of what to do with people, where we're not trying to solve, we're trying to clarify. And so you wrote about how you have a proclivity to intellectualize your problems. I'm curious about how there seems to be a link between these two. Like if this is the problem, this is how to solve it. Let's think it through. Let's get it done. In developing these other aspects, these other approaches where you can deliberately not choose to solve it, sit, clarify. How have you challenged or short-circuited your own proclivity to intellectualize problems?
I'll try to give an example. So I, right now, I'm applying to jobs, and anyone who's on a job hunt has a story of, why am I getting this feedback? Why am I not getting the first job I apply for? And that could look like the job market sucks. The types of companies that hire are not the companies I um, that I value, or I'm not smart, or I should have, you know, joined a different company 10 years ago, and that would have set me up for success. And they're all stories. The Those stories often have impacts on behavior. Like, I feel like I'm not smart enough, therefore I'm not going to apply to that job. I'm not going to spend more time writing out a better resume because I am just going to, get the same kind of response of, this person isn't it. And those become self-reinforcing beliefs as a result. I think the thing that I struggle with still, but at least I'm aware of, is there's an emotion behind the story, and there's an emotion I'm avoiding behind the story. And so, what am I really avoiding by telling myself that uh, I am not a good leader? Let's say that's my story. I'm not a good leader, therefore I'm not getting accepted into leadership positions. What is the emotion? Do I, like, if I believe that about myself, that's a pretty shameful opinion. So if there's shame behind that story, what other emotions are coming up for me? Like, what's where does that story come from? I'm not a good leader. Did it come from parents? Did it come from people I worked with? Is it coming from me? And then, what am I not doing? What am I not doing to prove, so that I can prove myself that I am a good leader? And usually there's some kind of risk there. Like, oh, I'm afraid of putting myself out there. I'm afraid of telling people uncomfortable truths. I'm afraid of being judged. All of those things that I'm afraid of, I'm avoiding those things, and I just gotta fucking do them. There's an emotion I'm avoiding there. There's fear. There's maybe anger. There's sadness. Whatever it is, I need to confront those head on. And the better I'm able to do that, the more I'm able to get rid of the story and do what I need to do to get a job, or whatever it is that my goal is.
In applying to work, the essence of it is to be accepted in the community. This new employer is the community that will accept me, and therefore, every time we apply for work, we're auditioning. Someone please accept me. I hope this group does, and we try to show the way in which we are like that community, the one that we feel most hurt by. The rejection that we feel the most hurt by is where we saw the most of ourselves in them, and vice versa. But they didn't see that. And shame itself has around it, navigating it, there's elements of forgiveness and repentance and acceptance. I want to explore those themes of finding, about being forgiven, about being accepted, forgiving and accepting, and then how that can lead us into community, what that teaches us about community. Can you talk about what you've learned about being forgiven and being accepted?
There is, in men's work, there is a thing called a clearing, which is like, Nick, if I've got static with you, if I've got an issue with you, the sight of you gives me tension. There's a thing called the clearing that we choose to engage in order to, for me, to talk my shit, and say, like, here is the data, here are my judgments, here is what that makes me feel. And you can choose to, receive those or not, um, but the goal is those need to come out, because those are all stories that, like, if I don't say out loud, I'm just going to repeat them in my head again and again and again, and I can't be present with you until I say that stuff. Once that stuff is out, it is remarkable how I don't need you to say anything. Most times it's just saying it, and now I can actually listen to you. Now I can notice the things about you that I wasn't noticing before, because I was so fixated on me thinking that you were, uh, a hater, ungrateful, fucked me over, whatever it is that I'm angry about. And just knowing that that's like the process of connection is really key for any community. If you don't have static, if you don't have people confronting each other about their shit, about their relationship shit, you don't have community. There's no, that process itself builds trust. And if everyone's just avoiding that, then it's not a tight community. And so whenever there's a significant degree of conflict avoidance, if everyone's just supposed to be happy, um, that's not safety, in my opinion. You got to be able to see the shit go down and see how it comes out on the other side for there to be a high degree of trust and safety.
It feels antithetical to the workplace, where the strong community ties are weak community ties are the things that allow a company to be able to grow and shrink as it needs to. Whereas a strong community tie emphasizes the notion of connecting instead of removing, or you write about connecting instead of canceling. So
Mm-hmm.
the idea that people are not substitutable, and a community focuses on supporting and nurturing and providing accountability for those who still need to keep going on something. And so in a work environment, there's a firing, there's a downsizing, there's a falling apart. And afterwards, it's largely every individual has to provide for themselves. There is no longer the organization to sustain them. Unlike a community that relies on its inextricable interconnectedness. I'm curious about what you've come to expect from a company versus a community. Because it must be hard not to get idealistic.
Yeah, yeah. I think the goal of a company is to make money, to accumulate capital. That's what capitalism is. It's very explicit in its definition about what the whole goal is. And that's not what community is. And I think that is by design. And I think companies that get that mixed up do themselves a disservice. I think the idea of, like, calling a company a family, or we're a community and we just happen to make widgets and make money or software, whatever it is, um, that's when people start lying to themselves. And that's when I think trust goes down, and leadership says one thing but do another, and then people start being wary about, oh, is am I being lied to here? I think the companies that have the most trust are the ones that are very explicit and just say, like, we are here to do this, and it's not to make you feel good, it's to make money. And they have very explicit expectations of what it means then to be a part of that company and to be a good employee. So I think companies who are just very explicit and clear about what they're about, and that is tied to making money, are the ones that are actually more safe feeling to work for than companies that are pretending to be a nonprofit or pretending to like change the world in a good way, whatever it is. Yeah, community exists for its people. It doesn't exist to create a product. And therefore, the point is connection and support. If someone does something horrible in a company, they should not be at that company. They need to go away because that is getting in the way of making money, creating a product, etc. A community, I think, is the opposite, where if let's say that person kills somebody, we have a process called jail that puts that person away. Now, punishment is a part of any community. If someone does something bad, there needs to be consequences. But that person comes back to the community at some point. I mean, life in prison is one thing, but most people eventually come back. And how are we going to deal with that is a issue that most communities in modern society do not face. They just don't think about that question. They send them to a prison that is more violent than before, that person's life beforehand, gives them less support than what they had beforehand, tears them away from family and friends more than they were beforehand. And when they come back, they're not able to get a job, not able to get housing, and emotionally a less capable person than they were beforehand, a less resilient, less emotionally fluid person than they were beforehand. That's the difference, in my opinion, with a community. It's actually their community's responsibility to focus on healing more than an intimacy and connection, more than even justice, even fairness, even growth, whatever it is. And so I think companies should be focused on fairness. They should be focused on meritocracy, but not a community. It's that stuff gets in the way of intimacy and connection and having relationships, which is what I think are what communities are based on.
One of the areas of reference I like to go to around community is to a time or to an environment where there was no substitutes for a community, where one couldn't flit from one to another, start fresh. And two examples I've seen of that. One is in an Inuit film called Atanarjuat, the Fast Runner, and you see in it this bit of a rascal individual continues to cause trouble, and there's this attempt to rehabilitate, to navigate, and eventually just gets so egregious that he has to be excommunicated. And excommunication is the worst, because at that point, what group will accept you? There's a reason you left. Now, in exploring different hunter-gatherer tribes, especially if there's larger groups, there might be some conflict within one group, so somebody or a couple people leave to another one. Eventually, next time they reconvene, just the time has resolved it. Another reference point is in the book Original Wisdom by Robert Wolff. And he speaks about, he was a psychologist who worked with the Malay people. And he observed the inconsistencies between what he was taught about human nature and what he observed. One of the things he mentioned there was this, what we would call a kleptomaniac, someone who happens to steal things. And people in that community knew, oh, that's just the person who steals things. It's what they have to do. We'll get the stuff back. It's okay. This is just what they have to. So it's an inconvenience, but we're going to work with them. And as soon as you describe this notion of it's about bringing somebody into the community, it's more important than growth. It's more important than justice. It's how can we work with them? So it's this acceptance of we can't just replace someone. We can't just find a substitute. These are the people that we are around, that we have, we're born around, and we have to find a way to work with their peculiarities. What this touched on, I think, with your work for me was you wrote about how connection in community versus cancellation. And cancellation puts somebody into this, it's effectively a shame limbo, because there's no there's no room for repentance for someone at that point. There's no pathway to say, if I do these things, I can repent and I'll be accepted afterwards. Unless the community has those structures and has those rituals. And what you describe about jail and the pathway through the legal system, similarly, there are no rituals to guide someone into acceptance. Somebody comes out, somebody goes in, they're worse off there. There aren't resources for them to find a resolution for the reasons that they may have done the acts they did. It's profound for me for you to look at life from a perspective of community rather than this shame limbo where someone's just outcast somewhere, but what did they do then? And what do you expect an outcast to do? How would somebody who was excommunicated survive? What are they going to turn to? Because they cannot be integrated into society at that point. They've just been cut out. So they will find other ways to navigate because they still need to survive. Can you talk about what you've observed in this? And I realize that you mentioned you haven't had experience in prison, and also that one of the core tenets of men's work is that what happens there stays secret, and stays private. So I realize that this is a precarious question to ask that you may not have personal experience with. So I defer to you on how to navigate it.
I remember being in Circle. This is a couple months ago, and one of the men described his experience of being handcuffed, of having a hearing, of going to jail as a rite of passage into degradation. He was contrasting that with the rite of passage that we were doing in a retreat, which is a rite of passage into a community. And so on one hand, there's a process for having a rite of passage into a community where you're accepted, you're a man now, you have responsibilities, but you also have privileges. And that is an ancient ritual that cultures all over the world have seen as integral to keeping a community strong. It's integral to having roles that say, here's who you are right now, here are your responsibilities, here's your identity. In jail, the whole process from start to finish is you f- up. We are going to, in the pursuit of like fairness and safety, we are going to dehumanize you because we don't trust you, and so the way that you're spoken to in the legal system, and the way that your handcuffs are behind your back and your head's being bowed and you're stuffed in the back of a car. If you're in jail, you're stripped naked, and um, you're just stripped of all your belongings and connections to the outside world. If you up in jail, you're put in solitary confinement, and it's the most isolating experience that we can put someone through by design. And that is it's a degrading experience that doesn't give anyone a sense of here's my identity that I need to assume when I come out. I need to be a better man. I need to be a a more gracious person, because at the heart of it is shame. And shame is a paralyzing emotion that doesn't make anyone change unless by the grace of God they pull it out of their ass at some point. But but we just know this. Like it just we keep on trying it and it keeps on not working. Like, how successful is a parent shaming their kid to, stop watching TV late at night? Does that like maybe if it does work, it creates resentment. It creates other issues that we have to deal with. I do think that I mean, this is a kind of hotter take, um, but this was created for a reason. We have a secular system that is built on justice and the safety of the people who did not do anything bad. And so, in the pursuit of that, kind of anything goes. We need to have as fair a system as possible, and vote on punishments for people who do bad stuff. in most communities, there's this gray area between spirituality, religion, and justice. And religion tends to be more focused on healing than it is fairness. And when we secularized and got rid of the religious aspects of the justice system, the spiritual aspects of the justice system, all we could focus on all of a sudden was, what punishment does this guy deserve? And not, what healing does this person need to re-enter society? And so all of that got stripped away from a secular American legal system. And all we were left with was the punishment part. And we have reentry programs. I'm familiar with a lot of them, and they're just not set up to succeed in the same way punishment is set up to succeed. It's not the same amount of money. It's not the same amount of personnel. The amount of resource differential is just mind-boggling. It's not even a thing that people think of as a job. We think of lawyers, we think of prosecutors, maybe we think of defense attorneys. We don't think of the person who helps someone emotionally heal coming out of jail. And so it's just not a priority today. And I think that is one of the major failings of modern society.
In the subject of religion having a healing element rather than a punishment element, you in your blog you shared your favorite story about community, where a rabbi regularly visited a Jewish prisoner. The prisoner was a pedophile, which was considered, or is considered, the lowest caste within there. And when asked about visiting this outcast, Rabbi replied to the man that this prisoner was returning to their community, not to the prison, and therefore it was important to do that type of work. That sounds like, the word I initially had for this was rehabilitation, and I prefer your term of healing. Can you talk about what it means to be healed and reaccepted in a community that at one point considered it necessary to remove you and now is welcoming you back in a way?
Well, first, I wish I had a better term than healing as well, because it's a very incomplete term. It's vague. It means a lot of different things to different people. When I think of the word healing, or when I use it, it tends to mean some combination of feeling safe or feeling okay, able to do stuff, think the kind of things I want to think, do the kinds of things I want to do, without something horrible getting in the way. So, with all that being said, the process of having someone in jail as a pedophile, coming back into community, is, right now they are not allowed to sit in the same tables as somebody. They're not allowed to speak to most people in the jail. It's meant to be degrading and humiliating, because it is one of the most horrible crimes that we have. And so the idea of someone actively seeking out a pedophile to speak to them and ask about them and put them on a journey of reconnection every single week is like, that's the work. It's not like I don't do that. It's a huge time commitment and investment in someone that is seen as lesser. But that is what I think the best parts of community are about. If we expect people to come back into community, they need connection, and they need an on-ramp of like, I'm here. When I come back, I know I'm not going to have the respect of everyone there. I know I up, and people are going to treat me warily. They're not going to trust me, but I need to have a few people who have my best interests at heart in order to even take a few steps in the right direction once I'm there. And that part doesn't exist. You need a few people to say like, I want you to feel good, to be the person you want to be, and I will support you. That's what that rabbi was doing. And it's important that he's not doing that for everybody. He's only doing that for the people in his community, which I think a lot of, honestly, folks in modern society, liberal folks, they want to be for everybody. And that's just not how it works. You can't. There's limited resources. You have to choose your people at the end of the day, or else you stand for nobody. And we have to figure that out in life. Who are our people that we are going to help out in that way? So that if one of my friends screws up in a major way, I know that I got to do something. If someone down the street from me does something horrible, I'm probably not going to do anything. They're just not a part of the community that I think about every day. So I think it's on all of us to identify who those people are, so that when they do something that is against the norms, that is puts out other people at risk, that we call them in and let them know how we feel, but also provide an on-ramp for them to reestablishing connection.
You write about this exclusivity of community and necessity of it, in that the health of many individuals can be supported by, the way I interpreted your phrasing of that is, the health of individuals is supported by a strong community that is bound by specific culture, values, some sort of way of some sort of affinity. And those strong communities can then interact with each other. But there's only so much support that an individual of one community can receive from somewhere that doesn't have enough of them, enough aspects of them to consider. That if someone, how can someone who only understands at most small elements of you work on rehabilitating you? You need to go there where you understand the most, where you are under, the many sides of you are understood.
And I think this is a major misconception, that we need to really understand folks in order to help them. I think the number one skill in any kind of healing work, facilitation work, is what's called active listening. And it's core to therapy. It's core to a lot of modalities out there. And all it is doing one of three things. It's being silent, it's echoing the person's words, and it's asking clarifying questions. I don't need to know anything about anybody to do those three things. And I guarantee that just by doing those three things for 30 minutes to anybody is going to be one of the deepest conversations I can have. And that person who's speaking, who's responding, is going to go deeper, is going to understand more parts about themselves than they did before that conversation. And that's how it's done. It's that simple. It takes time. You do get better at it over time, but anybody can do that. And by doing that repeatedly with folks, I do think that's how connections are built.
What drew you specifically to All Kings, to that community, and to be of service there?
I loved men's work. I didn't start out doing men's work with All Kings. I did it with a group called Mankind Project. The history of men's work is it started in the Midwest. It is largely like middle-aged white guys. And I 1,000% support men's groups that are, nothing but middle-aged white guys. That's great. I think, like whatever the community is, there should be a men's group for that community. But for myself, I wanted to be pushed, and for me, I knew I had repressed anger and like repressed sadness. When I'm working with formerly incarcerated dudes, it's not an intellectual conversation. Everything's pretty live. It's like, this thing happened and I'm freaking angry about it. And so I get to see as opposed to speak about these emotions. If a dude's pissed because of something his wife said to him, I see anger. I don't hear an intellectual discussion about anger. And that's the medicine. I personally believe that formerly incarcerated men have a medicine that few other groups of people, let alone men, have. That medicine is their experience and their emotions around that experience. And that is a gift to anybody outside of that community that chooses to be in community with them. That's the goal of All Kings. It's not a group to help formerly incarcerated men. It is a group that is in community with formerly incarcerated men because the healing goes both ways. And so I needed that. I still need that. It's what I seek out for myself because it's the balance that helps me grow. And then over time, I mean, All Kings is just really good at what it does. It is some of the best, most well trained facilitation in men's work. We have great leadership and we have really awesome facilitators that do the work with us. And so I get to learn from the best people in the business. And that is a priceless experience for me that I keep on coming back for.
You wrote about the theme of freedom. That's what so many men want. And you've paraphrased it to, or you've translated that to getting one's balls back. That it's a freedom is the ability to have this trust in self to accomplish what's necessary, to have the agency to do it, even after committing to the responsibilities of life as a provider, as a worker, as an employee, as a colleague, whatever the role taken on, that there's still the ability to be self-sufficient there. Can you talk more about how you've gotten your balls back?
I think getting over shame is a big part of that for myself. For a lot of dudes, there's just a feeling of like, I am who I am that I didn't have 10 years ago. Honestly, I think a lot of dudes are going more conservative because that's the feeling they get from the conservative uh, elements of society. There is a feeling of freedom, and like, I can say what I want to say. I'm less policed. I don't have to feel shame for whatever, political opinions or words that I choose to use, whatever. My process was working with formerly incarcerated guys. I realized, like, I don't feel shame. I don't want them to feel shame about what they did because they need to grow into better people or the people they want to be. I don't want to feel shame because it's stopping me from what I want to be. And if I'm going to accept a guy who's killed somebody into my life as a friend, I'm also not going to judge 1,000 other people for whatever personality traits I find objectionable about them. And all of that judgment of other people and shame of myself washed away with that. And so, like, I still want to be a solid stand-up individual, but that now looks like it's on my terms, not somebody else's. I'm less fearful of judgment because of the community that I've built that I know has my back, and I don't give a shit what other people. I'm not dependent on other people's opinions to feel good about myself now. So that's a big part. I think shame is in getting one's balls back or feeling freedom is they're just linked pretty tightly. And then I just think that there's another element in modern society of just the internet. The internet is got its own rules about what to say and not say. Even if you don't get canceled, there's a fear of getting canceled. And social media punishes people by not engaging with content. So even if you're not getting nasty comments, if someone's not commenting or liking, people see that as a failure and they start saying stuff that does get likes or comments. And that creates its own policing effect about uh, what people say and don't say. And so breaking free of that, I think in 2024 is the ultimate freedom. If you can break free of feeding the algorithm, you're breaking free of one of the most constricting forces of how we feel and how we express ourselves in modern times.
I can't help but see a parallel there where you've described how perhaps the most important thing we can do for others is to help them feel safe. And coaching helped you feel safe, and then it helped you make others feel safe. Can you talk about that progression?
Yeah, I mean, I think it happens very like in parallel, because in men's work, the sense of safety I get is these guys are listening to me, they're hearing what I have to say. I don't know if they agree with it or not, but they're not running away. They're here and they're responding and they're asking questions and they seem curious. I don't know anything about their lives. They don't know anything. They probably don't even know what I do for a living, but we're engaging on some heavy shit and we're going deep together. And he is going to stay in that room and continue prodding me until I've reached the bottom of whatever feeling I'm feeling. It could be anger, it could be sadness, it could be fear, it could be shame. And then I'm going to do the same for that guy. And I know then I can say whatever it is I need to say. It could be offensive, it could be lame, and he's going to do the same thing. He's going to keep asking questions. He's going to stay with me. That feeling of this person has me is safety for me. And it's not like that happened 10 times and then I started doing that for other people 10 times. It's more like I received that and then I started asking a few questions for folks. And then I asked a few more questions for folks. And then over time, I can stay with somebody for 30 minutes just asking them questions. And it's not really it's half a skill to continue asking questions, but it's also just a willingness and a patience and a want to do this work with other people that has grown over time. And that I feel like is how I choose to create safety.
I'm so curious to explore this further, especially with what you described with the All Kings community. You mentioned earlier how if you can understand and ultimately befriend someone who's murdered, you can then, in understanding this person, shift your immediate perspective on so many others who might have done this act. Can you talk about an instance where something that you found something repulsive or where you felt an aversion internally about somebody else, what that taught you about yourself?
It's funny. I never really felt an aversion to formerly incarcerated men. I did feel an aversion to people I disagreed with politically or, in intellectual debates. And I think that's fairly common. We have a lot of sympathy for individuals who've done bad things. I think there's a lot of, oh, this person, but, they're still a good person. I think I see a lot of that. I think when it tends to get either religious or political, that patience goes away. And that was the realization I had was, I've got family members who are a lot more conservative than I am. I certainly am online and see things that I disagree with. And it was more realizing that, like, I have no issue uh, befriending and talking with somebody who has killed somebody. What does that say about me when someone wants to like decrease taxes by a little bit and now I'm getting worked up? It just seems like a double standard, and therefore, um, I realized that I didn't want to be more judgmental of formerly incarcerated guys as a response. I realized that that if I'm in community with folks, I'm gonna have to have patience with their beliefs and view. Chances are there's a part of them. I I I I have sympathy for formerly incarcerated guys because part of me has bloodlust, has a sense of revenge, gets pissed off, and seeks blood. I get that feeling. When it gets political or religious, there's a tendency to think I will never think that way. I will never feel what he's feeling. Until I realize, like, no, it's actually the exact same feelings and emotions, just expressed in a different way. And once I see that inside, once I see those same emotions inside of myself, uh, then I have a lot of forgiveness for that person, or this is just acceptance. I don't have to like it, but Uh, we're all dealing with the same set of emotions, the same reactions for the most part, and that guy thinks the same thing about me, and we might as well be in this together.
What sort of realizations did you have when you felt so much commonality with someone who was either incarcerated or formerly incarcerated, and your own capacity for, had your circumstances been different, doing the same acts?
It's a stretch to imagine that, like, oh, I could find myself doing 20 years in prison if something was just a little bit different, because my life is just so different. But you see it, you know, twice, then 10 times, then 20 times, and a pattern's a pattern. Growing up in a certain neighborhood, seeing a certain amount of violence at a certain age, it tends to create a certain type of outcome. Free will is a thing, but so is being traumatized and having an emotional reaction to stuff. And so it's it's a sad. It ends up just being a sad recognition of patterns and probability. I'm lucky enough to be on a certain side of it, but also, the issues that I grew up with that I'm still working on, are issues. They're just not ones that put me in jail for 20 years. Um, Now, I've done a lot of work, and there's a lot of things I've done like I've decided to do to avoid jail. I don't want to say like everything is there's no free will, and people don't deserve to go to jail. I think people deserve punishment is a necessary thing. But once I recognize that we live in a society that is violent and that does not support people, I have to accept that there are inevitable outcomes to that. And those outcomes are violent, and we should do something about it.
What does it mean for someone to be able to have once created fear and now is creating so much safety, that they are providing this clearing, they're asking these questions, they're in a group where they perhaps they just came from an environment where everything around them was unsafe, and now they're able to create a profound opposite?
Mm-hmm. I mean, so there's this concept in the work that we do in All Kings called being a credible messenger. And that's exactly what you're talking about. It's people who grew up on the streets, for lack of a better term, came from the hood, involved in gangs, involved in violence, or just plain are similar to the dudes that are doing violent shit today, and went to jail or somehow got over those issues to the point where now they exist to help other people. That is, I think, the key. Having credible messengers is the key to creating safety. No one is going to listen to somebody who is completely different from them. Like if I'm in a school assembly uh, as a kid and I hear a 60-year-old person who doesn't look like me, doesn't talk like me, doesn't dress like me, talk about how I need to be a better person, that dude. They don't know who I am. They don't know my struggles I deal with. And there's no reason that for me to assume that this person has my best interest at heart or knows who I am or has any advice that is actually going to do me good. And so the role of the credible messenger is to actually talk to people. And they have the most amount of medicine to give in this game. And we are all credible messengers for our own communities. I have a newsletter. It has an audience to people who, you know, are going to come from similar backgrounds from me. That's great. I'm not a credible messenger for, Black 12-year-olds in Harlem. Despite working in All Kings, like that's just not my role. And so uh, I do think that, especially when it comes to providing healing in communities that are racked by violence, the number one name of the game is, who do we have credible messengers? Can we build more credible messengers? It's not like some people just kind of come out of jail and are like, I'm healed. I know how to speak publicly and let's do this. And they are so rare because it's just not something that is naturally occurring. It requires a ton of skill. And so one of the key goals of a group like All Kings, but many groups, is how do you build a path so that people who want to fill that role can fill that role, because it requires so much training on how to speak, how to hold space for somebody, how to not bullshit oneself into thinking that, oh, my life has changed, when really I'm still up to my own bullshit still. And so all that takes time, but it's worth it.
This description of feeling safe, helping others feel safe, it sounds like a type of service. And you're intentional to point out the differences between domination and service, and the heuristics or the mental models that we as men have around how navigating the world. Can you talk about how you've experienced domination and service impulses in yourself, and how you've moved towards what felt more right to you?
Achievement, that is the goal for most young men, including myself. It's a kind of domination. It's saying, I want to be better. Uh, I want to be better than other folks, or I want to have more money than other folks, or I want to be a leader who's more capable than other folks. And then you've got your classic, I want to physically dominate other people by being stronger, or uh, by competing in martial arts, or just getting into fights and winning. So all of that is in some way related in domination. Then there is service, which every religion that I am aware of has a pretty deep relationship with. And it's this idea of, who do you serve? Is it God? Is it community? Whatever it is, your role is not to dominate. Your role is to support and be in service of X, Y, or Z. What's funny to me is it's the oldest lesson in humanity. Every religion figured this out, and it's so core to what people spend a portion of their week thinking about. And yet we keep on focusing on domination as the way out, as a way of providing value, of being respected. And so something is just not clicking, especially for men. I think women have a deeper sense of service. Being mothers is a deep sense of service to one's family. But for men, we're focused on providing, and that can often lead to a feeling valuable through domination more than it can be feeling valuable through service. But they're not mutually exclusive, and I don't think that everyone should just view themselves as servants, because they exist in balance. There's a amount of self-respect that domination requires. There's an ego there, and that's good. I've the downside of just focusing on service is lack of self-respect, is lack of putting up boundaries. And so I just think we need to recalibrate. And the thing that service does have on domination is the act of service in and of itself is a rewarding thing. Domination requires an outcome, and that outcome, the feeling I get from beating somebody at something, is very fleeting. So now I need to do it again and again and find a bigger enemy. Whereas service doesn't have that effect. It's not a rat race. It ultimately promotes connection, and that's good in and of itself. And so I do think it's a more rewarding path, and which is why religions promote it, because those religious leaders all figured out that, like, yeah, this is more fulfilling at the end of the day. You just have to believe in it and prioritize it.
Were you ever drawn to the military or the ministry as a path?
Never the military, although I love war films as much as any dude. The ministry, no, growing up. But the older I get, the more I do I look up to religious leaders. St. Patrick is a big role model for me, because I just think like they are the early Christian saints for me were the biggest punks of their time. They were the most countercultural people, really doing some wildly different stuff, putting their lives at risk, often dying for what they believed in. And it's like, I can think of a hot take or an opinion or do something a little risky, and it will never compare to the wild shit dudes were doing 1500 years ago and getting burnt at the stake as a result. And so it also just puts, I think, religious leaders of yore put my own struggles in perspective. And so I look up to them. Now, do I want to be a priest anytime soon? No. But I do think there's a lot of inspiration that comes from that field.
I've wondered if this is a modern luxury, a modern social luxury, where we have the ability to embody some of those values, or the values of what was once a limiting, is that the right word? A very defined life path, that we can now take on some of those attributes and incorporate them without being dedicated just to one. So you can maintain these, you can continue to grow your reflections and experiences in this space without having the challenge of being a complete heretic, because there's a space where what you're saying is accepted. There are niches in which you fit. We've spoken about this notion that the role that men must play, the men generally play, in terms of being the one to provide, to create safety, to if we're playing this domination game, it's for a purpose, and also to do this type of work, men have to create safety. So the thing that they're not used to doing, perhaps. And so I'm curious, what does it feel like as someone who is perhaps historically played the role of being the one to provide safety for others in your life, to instead be made to feel safe?
Tell me a little bit more about that, about the question. I'm curious, yeah, where it's coming from.
There's this, I think, reasonable social notion that the man of the household, the is supposed to provide the safety,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a reasonable role around that. And so whether it's earning, whether it's procuring resources, it is that person's responsibility. And in a nuclear family environment, there is no place for then that man to experience the safety he provides for the family. He experiences something else from the family. There's a nurturing, there's a nourishing, there's a relationship, but there isn't that experience of the thing that you give is not what you receive. And there's no equivalent of that, and you can't expect it, presumably, from a family unit, except for when you're a kid. And socially, there's the place to experience that would then be in camaraderie of men. the thing that they're capable of applying of providing for a family, now they're able to provide for each other. But there's so much splintering socially, and we have so few outlets and capacity for cultivating these relationships that we aren't able to receive that. Yeah, I think it's a curiosity. What does it feel like to be on the receiving end of the thing that you are most attuned to giving others?
So one, men are expected to provide physical safety, and men expect themselves to provide that. And increasingly, men, I, I think, are expected to provide emotional safety as well. That is just a changing expectation that's accelerated over the last 20 years, I would say. And therefore, men who do not provide that um, and are getting like they're getting bad feedback at work. They're getting negative feedback from their partners, from their own kids, saying like, "Dad, you're not there for me emotionally. You're not present." Or at work, you shouldn't have blown up at that person. You got to support them. You can't just get angry at them. And yes, men now need to find an outlet, a space for themselves to work on that. And family is not the place to learn how to do that, I think, from the ground up. And that's just because there's too many triggers at home. It's like, am I going to go back home to learn how to be patient with my mom? Is she the right tutor for me to learn how to be patient? No, she's the final boss of learning how to be patient. So let me figure out how to be this way with other people who are gonna be patient, who are gonna give me a lot of slack, who understand where I'm coming from, and then I can, when I'm ready, try out these new skills with uh, other people in my life. To the question of how is it to uh, is the question how to receive emotional safety when I've been giving physical safety or something else?
Oh, interesting. I don't want to limit it. How is it to receive safety, physical and emotional,
Hmm.
after being the one who's been expected to give it and not having perhaps a return previously
Got
because
it.
you weren't in environments where you could receive it because it
Yeah.
wasn't supposed to come from family.
And so I think men expect to receive emotional safety, not physical safety from other people, but emotional safety from family members. And for example, men don't do well with criticism. That is an expectation that I think a lot of men have, myself included. Like, I kind of shut down a lot of times if I receive criticism from my partner, for example. And that's just kind of the age old transaction that a lot of people have. Like, the man provides physical, the woman provides emotional. That's being muddied right now, or not muddied, but it's just being expanded. And so men now need to step into spaces where they receive and give emotional safety, because if they don't, it's going to impact their relationships, it's going to impact their jobs because of changing expectations. How is it to receive it? Like, emotionally, how is it to receive that? It's very difficult. I think if most people understood um, what men's work was about before going in, they wouldn't do it. It's the kind of thing that feels like intellectually, it feels like, oh, this is soft. This is not worth my time. This is for someone else. I understand dudes need to work on this stuff, but I'm fine. All those defenses start coming up when I I hear, okay, here's what like we're gonna do today. We're gonna practice being there for each other. Like, what the does that even mean? But when you see it in person, everything clicks. Everything is like, oh my god, okay, I feel alive now. I feel love. I feel connection. And every dude responds well to that. Every dude understands the value of feeling connection, of having each other's back. I just don't think we have a language for it right now that really promotes what that actually is. I feel like we'll figure that out, um, but I do feel like the anticipation is worse than the actual experiencing of it.
Yeah, what you just described about that we don't have the right language for it um, resonates. That it seems like the words that we use are approximations to what is done in men's work, but is not, but are actually coming from different environments. They're not. It's not language born of men's work. It's language that's adapted to, even they were born
Exactly.
from somewhere else.
I think this is one of the most exciting and difficult parts of modern emotional work is how a lot of these words come from therapy, they come from woman, or they come from gender studies. They do not come from men. We checked out of that field of inquiry a while ago, and all these concepts got developed without dudes really being engaged. And so now we need to figure this stuff out. So
Yeah.
we're using these words, these concepts, but they don't really resonate with us. If, like someone telling me to be vulnerable immediately creates a defensive like you reaction in me. Like, no, I don't want to be vulnerable. I'm like, what do you mean vulnerable? It is not a term that resonates with a lot of guys immediately. Being transparent does. I don't need to feel like I'm doing emotional work. Just tell me to be transparent in how I feel. And so I feel like slowly but surely we're going to create our own lexicon that resonates with men, and it'll slowly become more effective, but it does require us to do that work, and it's going to take time.
Any early prototypical language, prototypical words that have emerged for you?
So very, I mean, honestly, my dictionary of dudes that work for guys is pretty small, uh, but the ones that come to mind are transparent versus vulnerable, useful or not. Instead of saying positive or negative, saying useful or not useful. Instead of using the word trauma, saying legacy, intergenerational legacies as opposed to intergenerational traumas. Healing is something I'm working on as well because I just don't think it really gets at what most men are looking for. I think there's two types of healing. One is going down into pain. The other is going up into possibility. Um, Up into possibility, I often use the term creating agency. Like I want to feel more capable. So therefore, let's focus on me being able to do shit. Going down into pain is often about feeling a sense of safety. And so I tend to use those instead of the word healing. Um, Mental health is just a bad term. I think emotional mastery maybe is a little bit better. Emotional fluidity. I've heard men use mental fitness. I don't think we have a good term right now, but I know mental health is not it. And yeah, in general, I think a lot of these terms have a sense of like fragility embedded in them. And I think for men, I don't want to focus on fragility. I want to focus on strength. Teach me how to be strong, not teach me how to be not fragile. And so any term that smells of I'm weak and I'm soft and I'm just a victim here, as opposed to I am like getting the obstacle out of me becoming as strong as I possibly can be. Um, that's where we're going to need new words.
There's almost this element of how can you expand the term strength to not be a caricature of itself? As in, strength should embody. This is interesting. Calling something strength and fragility creates a dichotomy. to say strength includes the things that you wouldn't conceive of in that previous dichotomy, expands it and removes the dichotomy. Or at the very least, it allows you to embrace that strength is not, again, not this caricature, but it can only be like the toughness portion. It's also the ability to be gentle when necessary. But you're not emphasizing you should be gentle. You're saying this is strength.
And two concepts come to mind because I think that's a beautiful point. I use the word strength because it's so commonly associated with being a dude. I think more and more, though, we're moving towards two different concepts that are related. One is this term agency. So strength to me is mostly about doing the things I want to do to be the man I want to be. Agency encapsulates that. It is, I can physically and mentally and emotionally do these things. I can dip into whatever feeling I need to feel in order to move past it or feel connected or whatever. In men's work, there is a concept called the king. It's an archetype. It is the archetype that kind of commands the other archetype. So commonly understood in men's work is this notion of four archetypes existing in dudes: the lover, the magician, the warrior, the king. They all have different emotions associated with them, but you can kind of get a sense of what they are just by those names. The lover is all about touchy-feely, feeling connected. Warrior, get shits done. Magician, more cerebral, about education, also about teaching and learning. The king is the archetype that decides to dip into any one of those, the archetype that serves me most in this moment to achieve whatever outcome I want. And that's the goal. It's not physical strength. It's the ability to choose and execute, to dip into all these different emotions and ways of being because I decide that they serve me, not because I'm reacting and all of a sudden I am triggered in a way because of external forces. So uh, I do think these concepts of agency and being a king are where the work is headed.
Can I ask about your clarification question earlier? It was different from the ones before. And you almost, I think you asked what made me interested in asking that. Or at least that's how I understood what you asked there.
Yeah,
Can you say more about what led you to ask it that way?
I felt like there was an assumption. I forget what the question was exactly, but it was something like, "How is it to receive, when I'm used to giving?" And it felt like uh, there was an assumption around not receiving that I wanted to clarify because it didn't feel true to me.
Oh, I see. Mm-hmm. Are you open to talking about how you're taking on more capacity to create emotional safety has affected your relationship?
Emotional safety can sound very vague and mushy. Practically, to me, it means listening to other folks, doing active listening, asking clarifying questions. It also means modeling truth, just saying what is in my head. 10, 15 years ago, every relationship I was in, I got the same feedback of, I feel like there's a filter that is constantly running and I'm not getting what's in your head. And I kind of knew they were right. I also thought, like, isn't that just what thinking is like, what am I supposed to do here? That is just how my brain works. I think before I speak. And what they were really getting at was just a very heavy policing of my own words because I was afraid of what they would think or judge. It takes a lot of work to go from that state to just saying what's in my head and not fearing the repercussions. And that's where men's work comes into play, is just saying the shit out loud, saying the unsaid. And then in relationships, it just makes for better conversation. Like, it doesn't need to get too deep. It just, when people say the truth to each other, things are more interesting. And that's the major thing I get out of all of this, is just have more interesting conversations. And yes, like when things get emotional, I'm able to not run away and be there and ask questions and make sure I understand what's going on. And that happens from time to time. But for the most part, day to day, it's just saying the truth to each other. And that is the spice of my life.
How has your work, what you facilitated for others, or what you've observed, helped people become better fathers to their sons and or better sons to their fathers?
A few things come to mind. One is fathers take on so much emotional debt of needing to present themselves in a certain way and be strong and not crack and just show up solid day in, day out without having an emotional release of like, here's all the shit I'm feeling. Here's how I think about my kids. Here's how I think about my wife. Without that outlet, a lot gets bottled up and it comes out sideways. So simply saying, oh, this thing happened and it's, my kid's being a pain in the dick, or I love my kid, but I'm struggling with this, or I'm having this argument with my wife, and just hearing themselves say it out loud so that they can process it. And it's not just this internal, infinite loop in their heads, but they say it, they hear it, they can respond to it, and the conversation in the head evolves as a result. That's priceless. And I think that's 90% of the value of something like men's work. Then there's hearing other fathers and other people going through similar things and realizing I'm not alone. This is common. I don't need to feel as bad as I maybe do about whatever the situation I'm going through. Or I'm hearing legitimately how other fathers are tackling this and improving their life. And therefore, I see an exit ramp to whatever negative feelings I'm feeling about my own life. That's another huge part, too. I think dads are an especially lonely species in modern times, and they need each other to survive and be better dads. And not necessarily better dads in the sense of do better things for their kids or provide more, but just more present. You can't be present and only deal with these issues by yourself.
Are you open to sharing about how your work with this helped you better understand your relationship with your dad, and especially perhaps understanding things from his perspective?
For me, it's sad thinking about that, because I wanted to expose my dad to this work, and I was not able to, or at least I didn't do that before he died. And that's one of my biggest regrets, is not doing this work with my dad beforehand, and just not showing him what it was really about, not inviting him to a retreat or a circle. I think every father and son should do this work together. Big statement, but honestly think everyone gets something out of this in a monumental way. It's not a slight shift, it's a big shift. And I've seen fathers and sons do this work together, and it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever witnessed. In terms of what I've gotten it out of my understanding from my dad, though, it gave me a the work gave me a vocabulary for emotions, and I can then see which emotions I was feeling and which emotions my dad was feeling and label them. And my dad feared feeling angry at anyone. It was just not an emotion that he expressed to us. And so it would come out sideways sometimes. There's like a certain passive aggression that comes out for anyone who's repressing anger. And once I noticed that in him, I noticed that in myself. And so I think he is emblematic of a lot of fathers out there who were trained to not be the angry dad, to treat everyone with kindness and to try to be kind. My dad grew up in Wisconsin, in the Midwest, devout Catholic, and there's an archetype to that. It's a very gentle, kind of a patient, maybe more go with the flow interpersonally type of guy. And that's who he was to friends and family, at least. Professionally, I mean, he did what had to be done, and he was a very successful uh, comedy writer and executive producer. But interpersonally, just the kindest person and stoic. And those words for an adult man often mean emotionally repressed. And the work helped highlight that for me, that there is a difference between kindness and stoicism and just not feeling feelings or repressing those feelings. And the more I saw it in him, the more I saw it in myself.
Was there a disconnect for you with the description, the kind of this crude simplification that the primary emotion that men are allowed to express is anger? Because that was exactly the one that both you and your father didn't express. And so in hearing you mention that earlier, and in this, and also just now about you and your dad, at least for me, it's rare to hear that, because I've seen that narrow band, and I've seen it discussed about young men and older generations. So it was even more surprising to me to hear you describe this Midwest culture, this Midwest Catholic culture, where that portion wasn't expressed. So, with the paltry resources available to men to talk about and to explore emotions, many of them discuss the anger, the limitations, or like the reduced range of just anger. And yet that's exactly the thing that you're not expressing. So even
Mm-hmm.
more so, the resources available are ill-fitting. Did you have to navigate that?
Yeah. Well, first on this concept of anger being the one negative emotion that I have permission to feel. I think that is a somewhat dated analysis, and it differs by class. I do think there's a big class difference. I think with the rise of feminism, more recent feminism, a lot of guys got the memo that we were too angry, and that especially towards women and children, don't show anger. I see that happening a lot with white collar men, where anger is the number one emotion white collar men are afraid to express. Um, and that's different. Like the formerly incarcerated guys I work with, that is not the case. Anger is happening. It's live. But what this means for white collar guys or anyone who's not um, comfortable expressing anger is the numbness increases by many times. Let's put it this way. If you're not feeling anger, that has to go someplace else. Usually shame. That's where I see it going most. Sometimes fear and anxiety too. And so it creates a different archetype. It's not the angry guy, it's the shameful guy. And Gen Z is I think the most emblematic of that right now, because shame is such a predominant emotion among young men. Um, I don't see many young men feeling anger. I see them feeling shame.
You live in between multiple worlds. You have the perspective on being attuned to a side where you can relate to formerly incarcerated folks, and also the white collar world, and emotionally intelligent and an intentional approach to navigating yourself in many ways that allows you to provide a considerable service for others. You're teaching many. And also, it perhaps isolates you in that the number of people who are able to be receptive to all of your sides narrows.
If there anyone who considers himself a guru in this stuff, that's probably the mindset they've got. Is that there's only a certain amount of people now that I can like do work with. I can I can be in a relationship with, and they're going to level me up, and they're going to be able to hold me in whatever I've got. I'm just not that way. I don't see myself as a guru. I don't see myself as this like super complicated, multifaceted dude who's got more than your average person going on upstairs. I think the more I do this work, the more I'm able to just be with other people, no matter where they're coming from. And the more I do it, the more I appreciate other people's kind of complexity and feel comfortable just sharing my own shit with them and growing with them. I myself do not feel like the more I do this work, the more complicated I get, the more multifaceted I get. I'm I'm not in this to achieve a certain level of competence emotionally, honestly. I'm in this work to just be with more people. If that means like just being an emotionally normal guy, great. That's the point. I don't want the most amount of emotional nuance in the world. I just want to talk to folks. So, uh, yeah, I feel I feel pretty good with that.
That's the service mentality you're talking about. The domination would be you're in the rarefied elite, and the service mindset is I want to be able to bring this to anyone and to feel as if you can commune with them, and you're embodying that.
Yes, and I'm not doing this for charity's sake. I'm doing this because it's for me, and I enjoy this work. I enjoy being with other people as opposed to like leading other people or feeling better than other people. That's just a mindset shift that is a result of this work. So, um, so yeah, it's a service mentality, but it's also just it makes me feel good as opposed to worse. Like it is for me at the end of the day.
If you think about where you are today, who are all the younger selves you feel compelled to hug as a thank you for having lived through it all?
Yeah, there's definitely like a high school version of me that was living in fear a lot. That was very mindful and wary of what I said, what I did in order to avoid conflict, avoid other people's anger. And so I want to hug that kid. And a lot of my work is around just dealing with the ramifications of that period of my life where I was just very afraid all the time. And then there's a version of me, I think, is coming out of college that wanted to be different and wanted to prove myself as was kind of it was angsty. It was like all these people politically like it's Silicon Valley tech people, anyone with power, and they're the source of problems in the world, and I'm not going to be like them. And I want to hug that person too because it's not them; it's this broader system that I have issues with, and everyone, is just more similar to me than different. I think there's another version of me that needed to be powerful and special in order to feel valuable or loved, and um, that still exists in me to a certain extent. But more and more as I get older, the point is community. It's not to be seen that way. The more I can hug myself even today around releasing that need and just being with other people and enjoying other people's company, um, without some kind of dialogue in the back of my head about how do I be someone else, how do I impress this other person, uh, yeah, the better my life will be, and the more fulfilled I think I'll be.
Who are all the people you've yet to be?
I don't know, man. It's a good question. We'll find out. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's going to be a lot like this person right now. I don't think I'm, you know, I don't. I've changed, but I'm pretty good with where I'm at right now. I'm not trying to redo all of this right now. But we'll see. Times change.
What are you surprised didn't come up in this conversation?
In the lead up to this conversation, in our like pre-call, there were, I can't remember which ones, but we had some conversations about all these like more pop culture opinions, um, and I forget what those were. But this was more introspective than looking out, and so um, this is probably the most amount of in like talking about myself I've ever done in my entire life in one go, and that's surprising.
One of the main uh, areas of focus for a conversational portrait is to capture or to convey, how you're becoming fully yourself, this continuous process of it. And so, in reflecting on this conversation we just had, how do you feel about the person you're becoming?
It's so hard to say here's who I am right now because it's so obviously wrong in hindsight. Whatever I feel like I am right now, 5 years from now, I'll be like, oh boy, was I off. What I'm working on for myself right now is more, yeah, more agency, more just like doing the things. I tend to think a lot and write a lot, which I love doing, but it's a very cerebral state. And it can be hard for me to switch that state off and just enjoy and do and be with other people, or start new ventures, whatever it is. And so I'm looking forward to like turning down the intellectual part of my mind and turning up the doing shit part of my mind.
I'm curious to see what that looks like.
Me too, man.
We started off with learning about where you find your silence. And so I'd like to give you the silence now to have and or to fill. So the space is now yours.
I gotta say whatever I want to say. Is that the point, or just sit here in silence?
You asked an or question. I'm going to answer with a yes.
Close my eyes, put my feet on the ground, take a deep breath. Thanks, man. I just feel grateful. It's a rare privilege to be asked so many questions about one's life. I think we all secretly hope for moments like these to just say, here's who I am and what I believe in. And I might not have this opportunity again. And so you've given this to me, and I'm deeply grateful for that.
We can schedule another portrait in 6 months from now. Thank you for sitting for a conversational portrait, Johnny.
Nick, thank you so much, man. Appreciate you. Appreciate this podcast and your work.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, have you seen have you heard of the movie The Mark of Cain? It's a documentary about prison tattoos in Russia and like the
It
caste
sounds
system.
right down my alley, but I have not seen that.
I'll send you a link to it. I can't remember how I was looking. I think I was looking into prison psychology because I wanted to find a prison psychologist to talk about, to discuss those portions, especially people who have realized like that's not the way to rehabilitate. And so somehow I came across this documentary. And I know we didn't get a chance to discuss tattoos, but there's like it's like the Russian caste system of tattoos and the culture different generations between. You might thoroughly enjoy this.
It's cool. I mean, no one does prison tattoos better than Russians.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, that's it. This is such a privilege, man. Thank you for this. Thank you for doing all the research on on my blog and all these things I've put out there. It really shows, and uh, I just enjoyed this conversation so much more than I ever would have imagined because of that.
It was fun reading your blog. Like I really got into it.
Thank you.
And like seeing like the evolution of it, it was just yeah, that was and like seeing where I assumed you were experimenting with like here's some advice, here's something. I mean, like around the protocol daddy time, like well here are some of the things that I've found. Like it became a resource as well. There was the exploration, also like the giving back, the
Mm,
synthesis.
yeah. Thank you. I definitely, sir. I go for that, or at least I did. It's evolving a little bit. Um, Now that I don't want to spend more than 8 hours doing a single blog post, but yeah, that's the hope.
How was the feedback and response after the All Kings article came out in the New York Times?
It was good. I mean, it's not a controversial article. It's a it's just like, here are these guys, they do good work. What that means is it basically just becomes a piece that we get to send to government agencies and funding partners and folks as just like a, hey, here's who we are. You know, if you want to understand us, this is an easy way to do that, which is priceless for us. But it's not like a major conversational piece that's going to spur debate online. The most responses that we got was on New York Times Instagram, weirdly enough, and there was an interesting conversation around like femininity of the work, and people call, like you had one side saying, "Oh, this work's good," other people saying like, "Then need this." The majority of people were like, This sounds amazing," and it was just positive stuff, um, which is great to hear. But from a marketing standpoint, what I want is I want people to debate, and so it taught me that you know we don't, like, if we were to do this again, we have the you know here's a positive angle, and if I want men, and the next step is making men's work a part of the conversation, and that requires taking a controversial stance.
Very curious to see how that evolves and what publication you find would be the most fitting to craft that angle.
Yeah, yeah. Who knows?
Thank you for being an exceptional guest. This was probably the most challenging conversation I've had, and I think it was challenging on my end because I didn't get enough sleep last night, and I'm in a tense. I was yesterday, the last couple of days, I've been in a tense, virtual conversations. Like I definitely felt that carry over. I'm like, I'm not present enough in this.
Mm.
What's like, this feels so different, and I'm sure even at least implicitly you picked up on something there, but there was just, yeah, it was definitely work on my end, and not because of you. Which is why I'm saying like, thank you for being an exceptional guest. It was
I don't. I mean, no worries about that. Um, but I still like, regardless of the lack of sleep, I think you prepped an insane amount, and I really had a great time. I thought the questions were really interesting, and so, yeah, thank you, man. I I'm looking forward to seeing this when it comes out, and also just seeing the others when they come out, and getting a sense of yeah, how this gets packaged up and presents inner landscapes, because I think it's a really interesting podcast concept.
awesome. Thanks again, Johnny.
Godspeed. Good luck. Super excited for this to come out.